Ralph Russo in a little bit of a different spot this year heading into the AP poll, which was released yesterday. First, Ralph, you go from sort of the organizer, the overseer, to now a voter in the AP poll. How's it been different for you the last couple of weeks?
Well, it's still busy. It's not quite as busy and stressful. That's a good thing. Overseeing that thing and making sure it publishes is, I guess, it can be a little stressful and certainly a lot of work. Putting a ballot together is a lot of work too, especially if you want to do it well. And frankly, I think what happens with the first one, you have so much time to do it and you want to be diligent. You want to do a lot of research. You probably end up overthinking it, or at least I think I did. I probably overthought it a little bit, but it's fine. You come out where you do. It's been definitely a different experience, a little bit of a weird experience to be on the other side of the fence, but also pretty fun. I would say, I'm looking forward to the rest of the season. Maybe I won't be quite as enthusiastic on a 3 a.m. Sunday night when I'm pouring through box scores and highlights trying to fill out my ballot. But right now, for the first one, it was pretty cool.
What did you have the hardest time with when you're trying to kind of line these things up? What was the toughest decision you had to make?
So the two factors that really complicated this one, at the very top of the ballot, which is the most important part, you have the most talented teams in the country. If you look at their rosters, most of those teams, Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, let's say Notre Dame, let's say Oregon, have some kind of question mark with their quarterback situation, right? Even Texas to a certain degree, but relative, right? So you end up lining this up and you say, well, Arch is a new starter, but in the big picture, he's been there for 2 years. He's a 5-star. He's played a little bit. Like, he's still got more experience than Julian Sayin, than Gunnar Stockton, though Stockton has notable experience, right? So that complicates things when you have these very good rosters that could be undermined by quarterback uncertainty. Even Dante Moore, he played a full season at UCLA, but that didn't go very well, and that was 2 years ago. So that makes the top hard, and it also, I think, benefits teams like Penn State and Clemson, because you can tell me you don't like Drew Aller or you don't like Cade Klubnik, but at least you know what you're going to get, right? There's a certain floor ceiling there that you feel comfortable with. So that was tricky. And right after that group of teams, about 8 or 9 teams, man, once you get to 10, you find yourself thinking, like, nobody should be 10. Right. Like, I think in the actual poll, it was Miami, and I'm not that high on Miami. I think I had them 15 in mine. Like, I just felt like anybody I put 10 through 14 looked wrong. I ended up with like A&M at 10, and like, you can come at me and be like, A&M at 10, that sounds crazy. Like then who else, right? Then Miami, then Michigan, then maybe Florida. Like, all of those teams in that range seemed like a bad fit. So I thought that was the other challenge too. Like, I'm putting these teams in that range and thinking, like, this doesn't feel like the 10th or 11th best team in the country.
I want to go back to sort of your time when you had a different role with the AP than you do right now in putting this together. What was the most difficult task? Maybe not for you personally in coming up with who you thought should be where, like you are now, but just organizing it. Is it making sure the votes get in on time? Is it trying to make sure everybody had their votes correct? If somebody needed to go back and put a different team in a different place, what's the biggest relief that you're not having to manage right now that you did for so many years?
Yeah, there definitely is the hurting. And listen, people are very diligent. There's usually 60. I think the voting panel at basically range from 61 or 2 to about 65, depending on the year. It moved around a little bit because occasionally we would add voters, sort of on a national level. But for the most part, like, that was the basic number. And it's an exercise in herding cats to a certain degree. Everybody's got a job, right? Like, this is not the voters' job. They're media members who cover college football. They're traveling on Saturdays, or they're moving around and doing their actual job. So this is a volunteer gig. I'm sure I'm going to feel that too at this year when I'm covering college football from week to week. So making sure everybody votes, making sure everybody votes correctly is a good point too. Because again, like you're filling out your ballot at 3 a.m. and oh my God, I left Kansas State off, just because I'm like moving teams around. So we're trying to help the voters with quality control, and picking voters got a little tougher too as the media landscape shrank, right? Like there's just not as many newspapers, not as many people just generally speaking covering the sport. So all of a sudden you found yourself thinking like, oh, I could really use an extra voter in this state, and there's just not as many to choose from. So those were the things that end up being, again, administratively, there was a lot there, and it just was on top of my job as a reporter.
I would imagine it's very difficult. I actually think you guys did a pretty good job this year. There's a couple I disagree with, but I honestly feel like all in all, it's pretty solid, especially with so many teams that feel bunched up between, say, 15 and 35. The one that I had the biggest disagreement on was SC. They're sitting there at 30, according to you guys. I have them at 11. I look at how many close calls they had last year. I look at what returns, the progress that's likely to be made from year 1 to year 2 defensively. SC, I think, is probably a fairly polarizing team. Where did you stand with SC, and how close did they get to cracking your top 25?
So I did not have them ranked, and I did not have them all that close. They were definitely in my consideration pool, but I don't want to get too bogged down in my process, though I wrote about it on The Athletic, and you guys can read it if you want. I sort of used some computer power ratings as my guide to creating a pool of like the top 40 teams, tiered them off, and then started moving them around because, you can't just, if they wanted a computer to vote, they would just use a computer, right? They want me to vote. So I sort of moved things around and had a couple of different criteria on which I leaned on. And without question, like the power rankings suggests exactly what you said. And I was on that last year too. I remember getting into some arguments about people like, hey, nobody's counting USC as a quality win in the Big Ten, but if you look, they are pretty good and they just keep losing a lot of close games. So here's what I would say. I'm with you in that they were on, I kind of want to see them prove it. I'm a little skeptical about the offensive line coming into this season, and we'll see how the defense projects. I think the greater problem with USC, and I'll speak for the whole voting panel, even though, it was just my problem. I think USC has burned us a lot lately. So I just wonder if a lot of folks are a little bit timid or passive about this idea of I don't want to buy in on USC. Let Lincoln prove it to me before I just put my money on USC, or I put my vote on USC.
It's usually thought process, G-Mac.
It is, and it makes perfect sense. Did you notice the same thing where there really were, and I feel like this year was maybe tougher to put together a top 25 than ever. I look at 15 to 35 like I referenced, and I feel like it's as interchangeable as it's ever been. I do think there's a separation from the top 4. I think the 5 through 10 are pretty interchangeable. I'm kind of fine with whatever direction you decide to head. I think 11 through 15 are about right. And I think 15 through 35, I could make a case for any of those 20 teams to be in the top 25. Did you have a similar feel as you were putting yours together?
Generally, yes. But so where that came into play for me, especially because, if you look at my ballot compared to the poll, my 11, 12, 13 is very different from the polls because I am really not buying in totally on Illinois. I am not totally buying in on Arizona State. I am a little more skeptical of South Carolina and Ole Miss. Tennessee, those teams that were sort of in that range in the poll. Well, maybe not Tennessee. Tennessee definitely took the hit after the Nico situation. And listen, I understand there's some Vol fans who are not thrilled about that, but I think it's not so much, not to get too down the rabbit hole, I don't think it's so much that people thought Nico was going to be great as much as I think they're getting worse at quarterback. I think, even if Nico wasn't going to be a star, I don't think they're going to get better at quarterback. So anyway, getting back to your point, yes, I think that I found myself sort of leaning into the metrics and leaning into returning production and returning starters. But I could definitely find myself looking at who was a good one. Like I ended up having Louisville in the poll instead of Tennessee, right? But I could have also, I think, found myself looking at like Iowa State. I didn't have Iowa, was sort of on my list of maybe they should be in. And that's why USC, I kind of constantly found myself bouncing back to USC, thinking like the numbers suggest I should have this team ranked, there really doesn't seem to be that much difference between USC and SMU. And SMU is another one that was sort of in that middle of the teens that I don't know if I'm really buying in on SMU this year as much as last year. So there was definitely a lot of teams where I found myself thinking, I got to have 25 teams here. So even if I don't love Illinois, they certainly deserve a spot on this ballot.
I think most folks would understand that and get that. I want to hear from you and your mindset going in and what your conversations have been like over the years of movement in the polls. And you haven't really had to do it much yet, obviously being a voter this time and haven't been in the past. How do you suspect you'll handle that specifically early, Ralph? Because that's one thing Greg and I have said that I think my biggest complaint with the polls has always been refusal to move teams that lose early. It's like you want to prove yourself right a lot of the times. Did you hear much of that from people in the past, and what have you told yourself that you want to try to be moving forward?
So I don't know if it's much of conversations with people as much as having been so involved in the poll for 20 years, I would see patterns, right? I would notice sort of anecdotally and even maybe looking through research, some patterns. And I actually found over the 20 years that I did it, that voters were a little more likely to be aggressive early in the season than they were when I first started doing it 20 years ago, right? Now, that doesn't mean that they maybe are as aggressive as they should be, but I did sense in doing it for 20 years that they had become more likely to say, listen, early season, I'm going to be bold here, right? There was a meaningful game and I'm going to move some teams around. And I don't know if I'm going to be quite that aggressive, because I do wonder if what you end up doing is, and listen, it's early in the season, so you could always correct it, right? The results take you where the season goes. So I do respect the idea of being aggressive early, because you can just make up for it later. But I do then find myself thinking, like, do you end up overcorrecting early in the season based on low information games, right? Like, Georgia Tech and BC both beat Florida State early last year, jumped into the rankings, and because we thought that was a good win, right? I think that you have to be hesitant to, what do you do with these big games, right? We're going to have 3 top 10 games the first weekend of the season. I almost guarantee by the end of the year, not all 6 of those teams will be top 10 teams, right? At least 1 or 2 of them will probably, hit the skids a little bit and maybe be unranked or hit the back of the poll. But how much do you want to punish a team like Miami if it loses to Notre Dame or vice versa, right? How much do you want to punish Clemson and the loser of Clemson LSU? So I think that's the balance. Like, you're not going into this thing with no information. So I think the idea of like, hey, you need to throw out your preseason, your preseason impressions. Yeah, but like not too much early in the season. If you throw it out completely, like, you could end up looking a little silly in a few weeks when you've dropped a team 15 spots because they lost to another good team.
Finally, as you kind of look at the depth of the SEC, the depth of the Big Ten as reflected on the rankings, and look, I appreciate very much your willingness to change and adjust and adapt on the fly. I don't think we do enough of that. I also think it's a burden to have to completely rearrange and start from scratch every week. So I appreciate all that are willing to do this. But I look at this kind of depth of the SEC, for example, and the fact that Auburn is currently 38th to me is crazy. I think they should be much higher than that. What league is stronger, in your opinion, top to bottom right now?
Oh, the SEC is stronger top to bottom. I mean, that is always going to be the SEC's, the SEC's advantage. Its secret sauce is the fact that its 12th best team is almost certainly better than anybody else's 12th best team. We also go down the rabbit hole sometimes with that to a degree where does it matter if the SEC's 12th best team is better than the Big Ten's 12th best team when we are comparing their fourth best teams, right? Like how much do you want to put weight on the fact that let me pull the names out of here. Who would be about the 10th or 11th? Like, let's just say if Auburn is better, and I think, I think Auburn, somebody asked me who is the most likely 5-win team from last year to make the playoffs, and I think it's Auburn. Like, if I was looking for a team that could go from losing record to the playoffs this year, I think Auburn is probably my pick. I probably underrated them. Their offensive line, I don't know. You tell me, Cole. Their offensive line looks like it could be pretty damn good. But is Auburn being substantially better than Wisconsin? Is that important when we're sort of more so looking at comparing teams at the top of the conference? It's certainly pertinent, right? It's not meaningless because that's who you're playing. But I don't know if I want to get too bogged down in that conversation that I lose track of the real conversation, which is the teams at the top being compared to one another when it comes to playoff time.
Did you have a lot of difficulty with your top five? Because I feel like there's 1, 2, maybe 3 that I would feel really good about, and then it would get really confusing for me after that.
No, not too much. I knew my top 5 was going to be I was pretty bought in on Texas's number 1. I think they have questions, but I like their answers to those questions. I have a lot of confidence in Kyle Flood to rebuild the offensive line, which they've recruited well. Got to have a fair amount of confidence in Arch. So I was pretty locked in on Texas. Penn State, I kind of gave the number 2 because they have more returning, but I knew they would be in that top 5. I've got Alabama 3, which I know is weird. What? It's weird to think of Alabama as being undervalued, but I just think that their results of last season are skewing the opinion, and people are not looking at what they have coming back. They might have the best offensive and defensive lines in the country coming back. So I know they have questions at quarterback, but again, it's odd to say Alabama is being undervalued. So I knew Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Penn State, Texas was going to be my top 5.
Okay.
In some order, right? So I was comfortable with that. So I guess, you talk about are you comfortable with the top 5? Yeah, but my top 5 was a little different than everybody else's because I'm buying in on Bama.
Did you struggle with sort of newcomers, I guess? Let's say Texas Tech. A lot of people think it'll be really good this year. I don't know what to make of Texas Tech right now because there's going to be so much that's so new. But teams like that maybe haven't been in this spot for a while. How difficult was it for you to sort of rank them?
Yeah, without question. Again, to a certain degree, that's the most speculative. Those are the most speculative picks, right? Yeah. Listen, I try to do things taking a little of the subjectivity out, use some numbers, use some criteria. At a certain point, though, there's going to be a little vibes here, right? And you're going to trust that, wow, the portal haul looks pretty good, right? This is a team that the question becomes, can they all come together and actually be a team? But relative to the rest of the talent in the Big 12, this looks like a pretty darn good team that could be, I've been getting a bunch of emails from Texas Tech fans talking about what does an SEC roster look like in the Big 12. I don't know if they quite have an SEC roster, but the roster looks pretty good. And I think once you hit that 20 to 25 area, you are going to have to make some, again, sort of incorporate some vibes and just be a little speculative, because there's nothing, as Greg said, there's not a lot that's going to separate 22 from 33.
All right, before I let you go, Greg McElroy has been getting a lot of praise from Alabama fans the last 24 hours for all the nice things that he said. We can reverse that by you sharing with us all the really nice things he said about Texas in your article that came out today.
Yeah, I decided I needed a former quarterback's opinion, somebody with a little experience about when it comes to both Alabama and Texas. Because what I wrote is that Texas is the new Alabama. And what I meant by that is they're not going to win 6 national championships. Nobody's ever going to do what Nick Saban did. But I think that Texas seems to be moving into a phase where they are ready to sort of produce a national championship contender every year. And I think this year is the test of that, right? Because they do have some uncertainty, and yet they're still number one. I think Sark has sort of built this program in a way that they look like Alabama, that they look like Georgia, which essentially was Kirby taking the Alabama blueprint and transferring it to Athens, right? So it was great for Greg, because Greg, talked me down a little bit and said some nice things about Alabama, saying like, hey, listen, Alabama's not going away, because is it a zero-sum game? In other words, can Texas move into Alabama's spot and displace Alabama, which is essentially the hypothesis that I'm putting forth. Greg sort of talked me down from that. And again, his experience from both sides of the fence there, being an Alabama quarterback and being an Austin guy, or a Texas guy, I thought was really invaluable. So I appreciate you talking me down, Greg, and maybe making me look a little bit less like an idiot in that column.
Well, Texas, I really believe this. They will win a national championship, but to assume that Alabama is on the verge of replacement, I am absolutely not willing to go that far, because while, yes, Texas's resources are second to none, the culture that we have created in the great state of Alabama will not allow Alabama to fail. It's too important to our livelihood, that's for sure.
And I'm interested to see how it does turn out this year too, because again, I'm a guy who's just voted Alabama number 3 in the poll, right? So that roster is really stacked. I just wonder, my gut says if I give Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb some talented quarterbacks and some talented receivers, that's going to work out okay. I think there's a longer term, bigger picture question still to be answered about whether Kalen can recruit in the SEC in the way that is necessary, especially at a time when, Alabama is not going to get the quote unquote Saban discount anymore, right? Where kids basically say like, oh, I just got to come play for Saban because he's going to get me to the NFL, right? So that becomes gone. And like in a world where the talent is probably dispersed a little more thinly across a lot of teams, what does that look like for Alabama? And as you referenced before, at a time when money becomes a bigger factor than any other time, you're right. It's not like Alabama is poor here. They're not a poor school, but can they match up with schools that maybe have a little more resources and can tap into a little bit more revenue through basically, donors and big businesses within their towns? So I do think it's an interesting time for Alabama, and where they are compared to Texas will be pretty interesting to play out over the next couple of years. Yeah, but as you said, the idea that Alabama might disappear or be replaced, maybe that's a bit extreme. Absolutely. Though I might have suggested it.
No. Ralph, great stuff, man. Thanks so much. It's cool to get your insight on how you voted, why you voted, and then how you have viewed this process for so long before actually becoming a voter this year. Thanks for hanging out with us today. Well, we'd love to do it again soon.
Always a pleasure, gentlemen. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate Ralph Russo sticking to the script there on the Higginbotham hotline, not trying to ad-lib any of his answers, because
I hope he got. Did you email him the script?
Yes.
Perfect.
He had it. Yeah, there's no ad-libbing on this show. Unless you're by yourself, and then you have to.
3 hours of copy.
That's it.
It's just got to
right off the teleprompter that we don't have. But yes, one way or the other, it works. Kind of like
yours. Be a great investment.
It would. Kind of like your CBD store. It always works there. I can try to ad-lib a CBD read for you guys and tell them that they're the largest brick-and-mortar CBD retailer in the world. If you have arthritis or anxiety, you or your pet, they have products that can help you with that. Help your daily routine like better focus, more energy throughout the course of the day. How about weight loss? The Trim by SunMed on the shelves now at your CBD store. First company to have USDA certified organic oil supplements. And they even have 3 locations with great customer service for you. Highway 280 by Bailey Brothers, 150 by the Cajun Cleaver, Trustville just off 459, your CBD store where good health hits home. All right, we'll go around the SEC. Haven't really had a chance to do that yet this show as we got sidetracked. We got off script in the 8 o'clock hour.
That's what
Essentially what happens. When you try to ad lib, that's what happens. Things go south. We'll bring it back north next on Mac and Cube in the morning.